What is going on, guys? I am Paul Ryan, your host of the Not ATB Fantasy Show. If you're new to the show, thank you for joining us. And to our regular listeners, welcome back. With me, as always, is the best co-host in the world, Dave PigskinPapers Hartman. Dave, how are you?
I've recovered from the Dolphins' loss, which we'll talk about in a minute. It was a rough night around here Monday night. Although it was pretty funny because my wife is a huge Giants fan, and the Giants won on a last second field goal, and the Dolphins lost in brutal fashion at the end of the game. So half the house was happy. How are you doing, Paul?
I hear that. I'm doing well, sir. I can't complain. Dave, where can we find you on Twitter?
Yep, I'm at Pigskin Papers. And all my content is there, but also on my website, thepigskinpapers.com. I've got 2 columns a week during the football season, a waiver wire column that posts usually Monday or Tuesday, and a weekly fantasy preview, and that'll be up sometime tomorrow. Paul, where can people find you on Twitter? And besides this podcast, what have you been up to, and where's your content?
Yes, I am Paul Ryan. You can find me on X, aka Twitter, at Paul_Ryan15. And when I'm not recording with my friend Dave here, you can find me on Twitter or YouTube recording and talking about the Dallas Cowboys with my guys, Mike Crum, aka CD Piglet, and Brendan Smith, aka Brendan_Smith. Yeah, it's been a nice time to. It's a good time to be a Cowboys fan, Dave. I'll say that.
Yeah, 5 wins in a row. They're averaging 40 points a game over those 5 games. It's really been incredible. So let's start there. And since Dallas played on Sunday night and Miami played on Monday night, one of the 2 games on Monday night, I thought we could combine our sort of look back at Monday Night Football with a normal feature of the show, which is the Our Teams feature, where we talk about the last games played by your Cowboys, my Dolphins. So let's start with the Cowboys. Like I said, I mean, pretty big statement game for them. They gave Philly a very good game. The last game the Cowboys lost 6 weeks ago in week 9, I think it was, or week 8 in Philly. Beat the Eagles pretty resoundingly this time. A sound beating. What are your main takeaways from this game? And who's the best team in? Not just who's the best team in the NFC East, but who's looking at the schedules, who's more likely to win the division between those 2?
My main takeaways from this game were, 1, this Dallas team can beat anybody, can go head-to-head with anybody, go toe-to-toe with anybody. 2, I think this Dallas team is different than years past. We've been known to be a good regular season team, but here comes the playoffs and we're one and done, or there's major disappointment at some point. And then even in the regular season, like Romo was excellent in November, but when it came to December, the Cowboys had a tendency to crumble. We'd either lose the division, fall out of the playoff race, or do both. So this Cowboys team is different. Number 3 is Mike McCarthy is. He deserves a lot of credit for what this Cowboys team has become.
He's definitely a big step up from Jason Garrett.
My goodness,
I would say. So who's going to win the division?
I want to say, well, I know one of the questions is who is the best team in the NFC? Oh, in the NFC East. Yeah, I do think it's still the Cowboys. For a second, I read it there as who was the best team in the NFC. But yeah, who was the best team in the NFC East? I do think it's the Cowboys. And who's going to win this division? Man, you mentioned that Philly has an easier schedule, but the way that the Cowboys are playing, it's hard to vote against the Cowboys.
Yeah, I mean, I think the Cowboys are the better team, and I think they have shown that over the last 5 weeks, and especially, the Eagles have trailed at halftime in 6 straight games. Their defense really is showing that it kind of can't stop any good offense. But their schedule is a lot easier. And I have a funny – I don't know what happens if they end in a tie because they split their games, so you'd have to look at other factors. I don't know who has the better conference record. I think that would be next. I mean, Dallas's next 2 are a road trip to the 2 best teams in the AFC East. They got to play at Buffalo and then at Miami. And I don't know that the Eagles pick up another loss. So it's going to be interesting. I do think the Cowboys are the better team, and obviously, whoever wins that division, is going to be either the 1 or the 2 seed in the NFC, and that's huge. Means they wouldn't play on the road until the conference championship versus being a wild card and being on the road the whole time. So a lot riding on these last few weeks. And the funny thing is, the 49ers, which there's really like a big 3 in the NFC, and then there's a huge drop off. And the 49ers trounced both of them. But, they beat the Cowboys early in the season. So that's, the Cowboys are a different team right now. But, one of those 3 teams is going to the Super Bowl. I'd be shocked if the NFC sends anyone else. So it's going to be really interesting. But certainly, congrats to you and all the rest of Cowboy Nation, because they are playing better than any team in the NFL right now, and it's been some winning streak.
I appreciate that, Dave, and I hate to talk bad about your team, but the Dolphins are kind of, I don't know, what's it say about the Dolphins? They became the first team in a very long time to blow a 14-point lead with under 3 minutes remaining. What happened, and given all of their recent big injuries, how worried are you with a tough final stretch approaching?
I'm pretty worried. This was a game they needed to win. When you look at their remaining, if they could have gotten to 10 wins, and then with the Jets this week, they could have really put themselves in a very strong position to win the division and at least to get a wild card. Now, I think they'll probably, even if they lose the rest of their games, they might even still get in. But by losing that game to Tennessee, and that was just a terrible loss. They got a pick 6 in that game. They got a muffed punt at the 10, and still didn't win the game. I mean, and I hated the last series, not the last series, but the second to last series. Tennessee gets within 6 by scoring and getting the 2, and then Miami gets the ball and very un-Mike McDaniel runs it straight into the line twice, and then that puts pressure on third down. I wanted to see them just run their regular offense and not give the ball back. But I'm worried. Connor Williams is the heart of their offensive line. They were already without Teron Armstead and Robert Hunt, and now I think they're missing 4 of their 5 starting offensive linemen, and against a team like the Jets, that's going to be a problem. And especially, I think the weather's supposed to be bad. So I'm worried about this upcoming game. And then they play Dallas, Baltimore, and Buffalo. I mean, I'm worried that it's conceivable they don't win another game this year. I think they're better than that, but that was a bad way to go down, and their defense looked bad at the end of that game. They also recently lost Jalen Phillips. And the biggest injury of all, Tyreek Hill. I mean, I don't know if he'll play this week. He's clearly, probably shouldn't have come back into that game, but he did. In fact, I had seen on Twitter, he was ruled out, and then all of a sudden he's on the field in the second half. Like, first they said he was questionable to return, then they said he's not returning, and then all of a sudden he's on the field. So obviously they need him. I mean, he's their best player on either side of the ball, and he's what makes their offense go. When he's out there, defenses have to account for him in a way that opens up other things, really opens up their run game, no matter what state their offensive line is in. So I'm worried. That was a bad loss, and when you add in the injuries, it was a really bad loss. I still think they'll make the playoffs, but they might be limping home.
It's crazy to see because they started off the season so hot, and I still think they're a good team. But yeah, I mean, those injuries are really starting to pile up, Dave.
Yeah, and then, look, every team's dealing with injury. At least they still have their quarterback. Like more than half the teams in the AFC don't. So, it's on them now, and they need to show up this Sunday and beat a team that they should beat in the Jets, who they already beat. Although that was with Tim Boyle under center. And if they can take care of business this week, they've been very good at home this year, other than that end of the Tennessee game. So, then they have Dallas coming in. It's a game they can win, especially if Dallas has a tough tough game as I expect they will at Buffalo this week. But it's going to be interesting, and it didn't need to be this interesting.
Absolutely, absolutely.
So, I mentioned earlier that, and just sticking with what we saw in that Sunday night game, I mentioned earlier that the Eagles have been trailing at halftime in 6 games in a row, which is a lot. Now they've lost 2 in a row, and in the last 2 weeks, they played the other 2 kind of big 3 teams in the NFC, and they got pretty much their asses handed to them by both teams. And I saw this stat. This isn't my stat of the week, but over 10 possessions between the end of the 49ers game and the beginning of the Dallas game, and not counting the 49ers final possession when they played the Eagles because they just kneeled down. They gave up 9 touchdowns and 1 field goal to the 49ers and Cowboys across 10 consecutive possessions. So, do you think their fans should be worried at this point, or are they still, they went to the Super Bowl last year. Until someone beats them, they're the NFC, they're the standard bearers for the NFC. But should their fans be worried, or is this just something they're going through during the season, and when push comes to shove, the NFC still has to go through them?
I think we'll learn a lot about the Eagles team on Monday night when they face the Seahawks, but think about the offenses and the teams they just played, the San Francisco 49ers and the Dallas Cowboys. I mean, those 2 teams are just running over every team that they're facing right now. So it's hard to be mad at the Eagles. Of course you'd like for them to do better as a fan, but man, those teams aren't easy. And that's you mentioned the top 3 teams in the NFC East. The Philadelphia is one of those 3 teams, but they just happen to face the other 2. Them back-to-back weeks. So I wouldn't be worried as a fan. I definitely would not want to face the Eagles in the playoffs.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, one thing I was thinking about the Eagles, and we've seen this happen to some other teams, when they get to a Super Bowl, like they lost both of their coordinators.
Yeah.
Both Gannon and Steichen became head coaches, and that can be pretty disruptive when you've got that kind of talent on your coaching staff. And really, if you look at last year, the Eagles were, like a top 3 offense and a top 3 defense on the season. And they're not either of those things this year. I mean, they're still a really good offense when they get going. They're obviously really struggling on defense. They're not getting that same consistency of pass rush, when they set the sack record last year. And their back end is just getting exposed because they're not getting enough of a pass rush. But I agree with you. I mean, I wouldn't want to face them in the playoffs. They still have the most unstoppable play in football, which, kind of gives them an extra down anytime they're close after 3 downs. And I still think they're going to be a tough out in the playoffs. But having said that, like I said, they just played those 2 teams and got killed by both of them. And that can't give them a lot of confidence in a rematch.
Yeah, absolutely. Dave, we were talking about the Monday night games, and one of the teams that played on Monday night that was in one of those interesting finales there was the Giants and Tommy DeVito. And Tommy DeVito's story is fun, man. And the Giants eked out one over a good Packers team that came in hot, having won 3 in a row with the Giants having won 3 in a row with DeVito playing very well. Is this for real, or the Giants just kind of riding a wave right now?
Yeah, I don't know how real it is. I mean, it's funny because I'm in the New York area and I have Giant season tickets and I get their emails, and there's between him living at home and his mom cooking his food and doing his laundry, and the whole Italian connection in New York, and the way his agent dresses, and I mean, it's a great story, and it's been a lot of fun. And it's like, it's got a little bit of like the way things were around here with Linsanity. Like, it's just kind of a fun thing that's happened in New York. And I was at that first game when he came in, the Jet game, when Tyrod Taylor got hurt, and he came into that game, and, he's a 3rd quarterback. He hasn't practiced with the first string. They're playing a good Jets defense. It's raining, and they basically wouldn't let him throw the ball. I think he attempted he played like 3 quarters and an overtime, and he attempted like 5 passes or something like that. Like they just weren't going to let him lose that game. Obviously now he's had more time to practice with the first string and to get some real game reps. And, you know, he looks good. I mean, they haven't played great defenses the last couple weeks. So, you know, I think this is a fun story. I don't think he's the next Brock Purdy or Kurt Warner, like the guy nobody's ever heard of who becomes, you know, a star quarterback in the NFL. The good news is he'll get a few more starts. I think even when Taylor's ready, they'll probably just stick with DeVito because he's winning. I don't think there's a quarterback controversy in New York yet for next year, but it'll be interesting to see. I mean, if they win a couple more games and he keeps playing well, then he's certainly, you know, going to be on the team next year and have a chance to play. So it's a fun story in New York. It's getting a lot of press here, and people seem to be enjoying it. I just don't know if he's actually a good quarterback or if it's just kind of worked out for him. And this is like a funny little run that one day we'll remember, like, oh, remember that Tommy DeVito season? Yeah, whatever happened to that guy? You know? So we'll see.
Yeah.
I will say one thing. I think it shows that Brian Daboll can coach up a quarterback, you know, from Josh Allen to Daniel Jones last year to DeVito now. I mean, I think Daboll is a really good guy you want working with a young quarterback.
Absolutely. No disagreement here.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about the rest of this past week. It was another very interesting and kind of pivotal week as teams are jockeying for playoff position. And, you know, an interesting thing I saw after last week, you know, every NFL team now has had their bye. So everyone's played the same number of games. 13 of the 32 teams in the NFL are either 6-7 or 7-6. So you've really got like this huge chunk of teams that are going to be fighting for wild card spots. So it's going to be a pretty exciting finish, I think. So let's start with just kind of thinking about what we saw this week and ranking our weekly power rankings, our top 10 and our bottom 3. Why don't you go first, Paul, and give me your top 10 and bottom 3 NFL teams right now?
All right, so I'll start with my top 10. Number 1, San Francisco. No surprise there, I'm sure. Number 2, Dallas, moving all the way up to number 2. Number 3, the Baltimore Ravens. Number 4, the Philadelphia Eagles. Number 5, the Kansas City Chiefs. Number 6, the Detroit Lions. Number 7, the Buffalo Bills. Number 8, the Cleveland Browns. Number 9, the Jacksonville Jaguars. And for the first time in my top 10, the Denver Broncos.
All right, so no Dolphins in your top 10.
Oh my! They should definitely be there. No, but they should definitely be there. I don't know what I was thinking.
No, that's all right. That's all right. And your bottom 3?
Bottom 3, it's going to be Carolina, New England, and the Tennessee Titans.
You still got the Titans there after that big win. Okay. My top 4 are the same.
They have no roster.
I know. Yeah, but I don't know. Their defense is playing pretty well, actually. And I think they're going to beat the Texans this week too, but we'll get to that a little later in the show. My top 10, my top 4 are the same as yours: San Francisco, Dallas, Baltimore, Philadelphia. I have the 7-6 Buffalo Bills at number 5, fresh off their win over the Chiefs. I have the Chiefs 6, the Browns 7, the Dolphins 8, the Rams 9, and the Lions 10. And then my bottom 3 are Carolina, New England, and the Washington Commanders.
Okay. I like it. Man, I don't know what like I said, I forgot I was doing my top 10, and that's where we were late starting the show, and I don't know how I overlooked the Dolphins there, man.
Oh, the Dolphins, you know, they deserve to be knocked down, and I've got them 8th. I mean, I've barely got them still in the top 10, but it's only one week, so we'll see what happens moving forward.
Well, Dave, here we're going to talk about our performance of the week. Which player had the performance of the week in week 14? Let's do AFC and NFC.
All right, I'm going to give AFC to Will Levis. Not for the whole game. But, you know, he threw a pick 6 a bad pick six early in the game. Like, how do you not see a 320-pound defensive lineman? But he didn't. Kind of threw it right in his breadbasket. And he engineered an amazing comeback in the final 3 minutes. Drove his team down for 2 touchdowns, something he had never done before, like a fourth quarter last minute comeback. He really impressed me. The stage didn't look too big for him. I don't know, if the jury's still out on him. He had that great first game. He's kind of not been that good since then, but he certainly played well at the end of this game in prime time on the road. So I'm going to give it to Will Levis. NFC, I'll go with for the second straight week, Deebo Samuel. I mean, the last 2 weeks has just put on a clinic. I saw this stat. He's the first player since a running back on the Eagles in the 1960s, I think 1960, to have back-to-back games with 100 receiving yards, a rushing touchdown, and a receiving touchdown. He's just been a monster the last 2 weeks. It looks like no one can tackle him. He kind of looks like he did 2 years ago when he was such a threat out of the backfield. And I'm giving it to Deebo for the second week in a row. Who are your players of the week in each conference?
Yes, sir. I'll start off with the AFC. Man, I'm going to go with I shouldn't say my guy, but Mr. Zach Wilson. Zach Wilson. He threw for over 300 yards, has 2 touchdowns, and 0 turnovers. Even though the Texans' offense was banged up, it was nice to see Wilson have a good day. And then in the NFC, I'm going with Tommy Cutlets DeVito, winning his 3rd straight game, winning in prime time, and rushing for over 70 yards, giving fantasy players a nice little boost there. Hey, man, he's a fun guy to root for.
Yeah, I like those. Those are good choices. Your Week 14 duds in each conference.
Yeah, so my AFC dud, man, I got to go with Patrick Mahomes. He's a 2-time Super Bowl champion, 2-time MVP winner, and after all the calls that have gone his way, he complains about the refs, even though Kadarius Toney was clearly offsides. And then he can't even congratulate Josh Allen after the game. He complains about whining. He's whining and complaining. Not a good look for Mahomes there. And then NFC, I got to go with the Green Bay Packers, man. After winning 3 games in a row and beating the Lions and Chiefs in back-to-back weeks, they lose to the New York Giants. I mean, come on, man.
Yep, that's fair. I was tempted to just sort of run back my answer from last week for the AFC, which is the Steelers, who've now lost back-to-back games to 2-10 teams. But I had the same one as you, which is Mahomes, for just the way he handled the end of that game. I mean, I like the guy. But I thought that was kind of, sour grapes in a little bush league. And, they've gotten calls, including a huge call at the end of the last Super Bowl, or no call.
Yeah.
Or no, it was a call. It was the pass interference on Bradbury. So, I thought that was a little weak. And I'll go with the Eagles defense. I think I may have said them last week, but they just can't get off the field and they can't stop a good offense. And I get it. Like you said, the 49ers and the Cowboys, maybe nobody can stop them right now, but the Eagles defense has really, really gotten steamrolled the last 2 weeks. So they're mine.
I like those, man. I really do. Dave, what player or team was the biggest Week 14 surprise?
I'll go right back to Will Levis. I did not see that coming. I didn't think the Titans, they're once they had the last turnover that gave Miami a touchdown, I thought that game was over, and it wasn't because of Will Levis. So he was my biggest surprise of the week, and the Titans. How about for you?
I'm going to go with the Chicago Bears defense, Dave, holding the Lions offense to just 13 points, forcing 3 turnovers, and giving up less than 350 total yards. The Bears defense is starting to make some noise.
Yeah, that's a good one. And, there are a couple teams. I know the Panthers only have 1 win. Their defense is pretty good right now. They got Jason back. They have a really good secondary. And the Broncos, like early in the season, those were the 3 worst defenses in the league. Like if you had fantasy players going up against the Broncos, the Panthers, or the Bears, you were like, I'm getting the points.
Money.
And that's no longer the case. Like now you'd rather play the Eagles. Maybe not for a running back, but anything in a passing game. And certainly the Commanders are like the friendliest fantasy matchup. So it's sort of funny how that can change during the season. I wouldn't want to play the Bears right now. Like they're playing good or playing well on both sides of the ball. Maybe the most improved team in the NFL since the beginning of the season. It's them or the Broncos, I would think.
Absolutely. Yeah, I would agree with you there.
So, Paul, this is one of my favorite segments of the show. There are stats of the week. What's your favorite stat from week 14?
The Miami Dolphins are the first team to lose a 14-point lead with less than 3 minutes to go in a long, long time. Dave, how about you?
I think it was 1976 was the last time. So mine is kind of a 3-week stat. So Jake Browning has started 3 games in his NFL career, and he's completed almost 80% of his passes. He's got a 79.3 completion percentage. They started tracking completion percentage in 1950, and that's the highest completion percentage through the first 3 starts of any quarterback in history. And he's done it against, some defenses that came in, as good defenses. So, it's really impressive. So that's my stat of the week.
I like it. So, Dave, the Bengals wrecked the Colts and are back in the hunt with 2 solid wins over AFC South leaders. And Jake Browning, your guy, playing really well. Is this a playoff team?
Who makes the playoffs in the AFC is going to be really interesting because these teams are all like playing each other a lot. All these teams that are in contention because a lot of them are in the same divisions. And the Bengals are 7-6. Will they make the playoffs? I don't know. A bunch of the other playoff hopefuls are trending in the other direction. The Texans have lost 2 in a row. The Steelers have lost 2 in a row. The Colts lost this week. So, and the Chargers kind of are out of it now. They've lost a couple and they lost their quarterback. So I think they have a decent chance. They need to win their next 2 games. Their next 2 games are home Minnesota and at Pittsburgh, because after that they're at the Chiefs and then home against the Browns. Now maybe the Browns are locked in as the 5 seed at that point and don't need the game, but that's a tough closing 2. But I think they can win these next 2 to get to 9-6, and if they can do that, I think they're in pretty good position because I think some of those other teams are gonna fall away. What do you think? You think they're a playoff team?
I'll admit I haven't got to see a lot of the Bengals games this year, but just on paper, even with Jake Browning, they're looking pretty good, Dave. So, like you said, that AFC is kind of wide open outside of a couple of teams up top. There's like a clear top 3, and then everybody else. I don't know that AFC North is interesting because, of course, you've got Baltimore at number 1, and then you've got the Browns and the Bengals kind of making some noise there. So it'll be an interesting race for sure.
Yeah, I mean, I give the Bengals the benefit of the doubt because of how far they've gone the last 2 seasons. Like I kind of feel like this is their time, and they, even without Joe Burrow, who's been a big part of obviously what they've done the last couple years. They've got guys who've been there before, won these big games. And I over some of these other teams that haven't, like Indianapolis and Houston. I kind of think that gives them a little bit of an advantage, just the experience of having made deep playoff runs the last 2 years.
I hear you, Dave. I hear you there.
So I've mentioned the Bills a couple times already. I'm obviously pretty high on them. I had them 5th in my power rankings, even though they're 7-6. And their win over the Chiefs this past weekend, which early in the game, it looked like the Bills were maybe going to blow them out. You may remember my bold call last week was that they were going to beat the Chiefs by 2 touchdowns, and they got up 14-0 early in the game. And I was like, Dave, you're a genius. But it ended up as you'd expect with those 2 teams. It ended up coming down to the very end of the game. And the win put the Bills, right back in the mix, especially with everyone else losing. And the Chiefs are now, that division looked like it was over after 5 weeks of the season. And the Chiefs now only have a 1-game lead over the Broncos, which is kind of hard to believe. So I guess the question is, what are your thoughts on Buffalo and Kansas City right now and where these teams are at? And just as a separate thing, because you mentioned it earlier, were the refs right to throw that flag on Kadarius Toney?
I definitely thought the refs made the right call. And, both of these teams seem to be going in opposite directions, Dave. I still think the Chiefs are a playoff team, but because of their issues on offense, they aren't the clear favorite in the AFC like years past. I see Buffalo as a team that everyone needs to watch out for in the playoffs.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think the Bills right now are the team I'd like to play the least in the AFC. Josh Allen is just, playing at another level, and they've lost some players on defense, but their defense is still good. And it just seems like times their offense can be unstoppable, and I don't think that's true of really anyone else in the AFC. And I thought that I think you have to throw the flag there because the league apparently in the offseason warned teams that they were going to call that. And it's only been called 11 times this year, so maybe they haven't been that consistent. But if you don't throw a flag there, I mean, he was clearly offsides. Then, like, how offsides is offsides to warrant a flag? Does he have to be 5 inches offsides, 4 inches offsides? You got to, he was offsides. Throw the flag. And the fact that it ended up being such an exciting play, they don't know that when they throw the flag. I mean, the flag was thrown at the snap. So it's not like the refs saw a great play and then negated it. The play was negated at the snap. And you know what? Tony needs to know. I saw on Twitter someone posted when the Dolphins, there was one series in the game where they got down to like the 4-yard line and Tyreek Hill lines up, looks at his feet, looks at the sideline and backs up a foot. Like, that's what receivers are supposed to do. Like, make sure you're not lined up off sides. They call it the line of scrimmage for a reason. It's a line. So anyway, enough about that. We don't have to belabor it, but it's I agree. The Chiefs don't look as good as one would expect, and the Bills are dangerous.
Absolutely. Another dangerous team is the Rams, Dave. And the Rams just played 2 very solid offensive games against 2 of the NFL's best defenses, Cleveland and Baltimore. Matt Stafford is playing about as well as any quarterback right now, and they could have won both games. How dangerous is this team, assuming it can get one of the NFC wildcards?
I mean, I think they're a good team, and I think they're the 4th best team in the NFC. I think they're better than I think they're playing better than the Lions right now, on both sides of the ball. And you forget that they just won a Super Bowl, and they still have a lot of that team intact. Not so much the defense, but a decent amount of that offense is still intact, and they have a better running back than they did at the time. And they have instead of Odell Beckham, they have Puka Nacua alongside Cooper Kupp. A fun fact: there's only 3 teams in the NFL that have both a quarterback and a coach that's won a Super Bowl, and the Rams are one of the 3, and the Chiefs and the Broncos. The Rams can be pretty dangerous. I just think that those top 3 teams in the NFC are going to be hard for them to get through as a wild card. But I do think they're playing really well right now, and I think I had them maybe 9th in my power rankings. So I agree with you there. They're a riser, and you were on this last week, maybe even
I said last week. I was saying previously on the Cowboys pod that the Rams are not a team I want to see in the playoffs either, man.
So a final score from last week: Vikings 3, Raiders 0, and this game was scoreless at the 57-minute mark. Weather was not a factor. I mean, have you ever, Paul?
God, I haven't ever, and I don't ever want to.
Yeah, I'm glad I didn't see any of this game, is all I'll say about that.
Yeah, not sure we need to go too much more. I did see, though, that it sounded like maybe Josh Dobbs was benched and then Nick Mullins came in and the offense looked a little bit better. And then now there's some talk that
I think Mullins is starting. Mullins is starting. Yeah.
Interesting, man. Just Josh Dobbs he's a good quarterback. I'm not sure what happened or how that he could I believe. Is it O'Connell, the head coach of the Vikings?
Yeah, Kevin O'Connell.
Yeah, Kevin O'Connell. I'm not sure what he saw or what he saw or what he didn't like, out of Josh Dobbs on this game here, but kind of an interesting, almost like a snap decision. It seems like.
Well, if you remember the game before the bye, Dobbs threw 4 interceptions, and
Oh yeah,
there was talk over the bye week that they might make a change, but then he decided to go back to Dobbs, and Dobbs didn't get him any points. So it didn't surprise me. But it's kind of crazy when Josh Dobbs was like the darling of the NFL for like 10 weeks on 2 different
yeah,
teams.
yeah.
And then just, he just sort of you snapped back to what you'd expect from a guy who was, undrafted and lying on his couch.
Yeah, that's true.
But it makes you wonder how he played so well and what happened. Like it's just a pretty abrupt change in his play.
Momentum is a real thing, Dave. It really
Yeah,
is.
I think it is.
So you talked a little bit about the Steelers, Dave. The Steelers just lost back-to-back games, two-win teams at home in the span of 5 days. They've been just as bad on offense since they fired Matt Canada. Are the Steelers done?
I never want to say a Mike Tomlin team is done because, they'll look terrible for 2 weeks and then somehow he always ends up with a winning record, and they're 7-6 right now. They really had a path to put a stranglehold on one of those wild cards because they were 7-4 and then had back-to-back home games against two of the worst teams in the NFL and somehow managed to lose both games. I think they're probably done though. I think there's they let too many other teams in by losing those 2 games, and now their schedule is a little harder. And they don't have a good quarterback on the team, whether it's Kenny Pickett or Mitch Trubisky. They have a terrible quarterback situation, and you've seen it in how their offense has looked all year. I never want to count out a Mike Tomlin team. They're always resilient. They'll always play hard. But I think they did some real damage to themselves over the last 2 weeks that might be too much. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of surprising that they're still even 7-6. I know that a lot of people thought that they were frauds to starting off the season as well as they did, but now the truth is kind of coming to the surface about this team and who they are offensively. And I don't know if it's the offense, if it's Kenny Pickett, if it's a little bit of both. It's definitely obviously not Mike Tomlin. We know what kind of coach that he is, but the Steelers are in an interesting spot because Mike Tomlin's going to have his team fighting all the way to the end, so they're not going to have a top 5 or a top 10 pick. But you got to wonder, how much do they believe in Pickett, and how much longer can they stick with him?
Yeah, no, I think they'll be. They won't be in position to draft one of the top quarterbacks, and they took Pickett with like the 20th pick a couple years ago, and a lot of times when you take quarterbacks sort of towards the back end of the first round, you kind of know you're getting a guy that might not. I mean, you could take a guy with the second pick, and you might not be getting a franchise quarterback, but the further down you go, the less likely it is. So, yeah, that's going to be interesting. What they'll probably, I don't know what's going to be out there in free agency. My guess is they're not the type of team to trade up for a quarterback. So I think we'll probably see Pickett again next year. So staying in that division, the Cleveland Browns, talk about quarterbacks. They've now started 4 different quarterbacks this year, which might be the most of any team in the NFL. At 8-5, they're like 1 or 2 games ahead of all these other wild card hopefuls in the AFC, and they have a pretty easy schedule to end the season. It's been kind of an amazing year for them because, like I said, they've 4 different starting quarterbacks. They lost Nick Chubb in week 2, but here they are. It's a great story. Now they have Joe Flacco as their quarterback, and he's playing well, better probably than anyone expected for a 38-year-old coming off a couch. How dangerous is this team? We know they have a good defense. The AFC is kind of wide open. What do you think?
I mean, you mentioned their defense. The defense has been solid all year. One of the top 3, sometimes even the best defense in the NFL there for a few weeks, Dave. But, we've seen Jerome Ford. He stepped into the stepped in to fill the void of Nick Chubb, and he's filled that void admirably. And then now Joe Flacco, who's brought some life to this pass game, that even when Deshaun Watson was healthy, it's kind of looked as good, if not better, these past couple of weeks.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I think they're a team I wouldn't really want to play in the playoffs if I was one of the division winners, because it's going to be a slugfest, and that you're going to struggle to score points. So yeah, I think Flacco's kind of made them legit. They weren't with PJ Walker or DTR, they weren't going to win playoff games, I don't think, without a lot of luck. With Flacco, Flacco's a statue, but if you give him time, he still has the arm and a lot of arm strength. And they do have, some talent on that offense with Cooper and Elijah Moore and David Njoku and 2 running backs that can catch passes. So, yeah, I think they're a good team. I think they're a good story this year too, because a lot of teams have had all kinds of injuries and they've managed their way through it. And they just Grant Delpit, who's their, probably who they just extended and is probably, having an all-pro season, just went on IR. They've had a lot of injuries. Denzel Ward's been out for a while, but they've managed through it.
Yes, sir. If talking about Joe Flacco wasn't enough backup quarterback talk, Dave, it's another battle of backup AFC quarterbacks as Aiden O'Connell and the Raiders take on Easton Stick and the Chargers. Vegas and the Chargers score combined 7 points last week. Is this game actually worse on paper than the Steelers versus Pats last week? And as we discussed last week, is anyone watching this game besides the fans of both teams?
Yeah, so I was just reading that it might not even be Aiden O'Connell. The Raiders have declined to announce their starter. Easton Stick, and this is not an original line, but he sounds like a baseball bat or a hockey stick that you could buy at your local sporting goods store. And I just saw Keenan Allen is out for this game. And Josh Jacobs and Devonta Adams are both questionable, and there's real risk that they won't play either. So yeah, I'm not watching this game. I mean, I think for fantasy, maybe I'm not going to bet on it. And I think the only people watching this game will be degenerates, gamblers, fantasy football players. I'm sorry, world. I'm a degenerate too. I'm here doing a podcast about fantasy football and NFL football, but I think I've made this joke before. Amazon should return this game. They should go down to their Whole Foods and return the whole package. They got 2 turkeys in a row late in the season. I guess when they pick the prime time games early in the season, the Chargers were supposed to be pretty good this year. So, and the Raiders they have a huge fan base, but this is a pretty bad matchup.
Yeah, it really is. It really is.
Just for fun, Paul, predict the final score for this game.
We were kind of duped last week, Dave. We took some shots at the last Thursday's game, and it turned out to be quite an interesting game.
And it went way over the total. It went way over the total. The total was 30, and 39 points were scored.
Yeah, it did. So with these games being so unpredictable, I'll say 21-24 Raiders. I doubt 6 touchdowns will be scored, Dave, but you never know, man.
All right, I have it Raiders 17, Chargers 10.
Yeah, it makes a little more sense there for sure.
We'll see. So let's move into talking about this upcoming week 15. What's your game of the week, Paul?
Okay, so of course, you look at Buffalo and Dallas, and that's an easy one. However, I'll go a different way, and I'll say Baltimore versus Jacksonville is my nominee, Dave. With a point total of 42.5, which is kind of low in my opinion, Jackson versus Lawrence will be a fireworks show.
Yeah, I have that one also. I mean, Dallas, I had the same thing. I wrote down 2 games, Dallas and Buffalo, and that Jaguar Raven game. The Jaguars have lost 2 in a row. And because the Colts and Texans both lost last week, they haven't really lost that much ground, but losing 3 in a row at this point in the season would be pretty tough. And maybe this AFC South is going to end up kind of the way we thought, which is, maybe 10-7 wins the division or even 9. But it's, Baltimore doesn't need the game as much. and the game is in Jacksonville. But the Ravens want the 1 seed, and right now they're in position to get it. They're the only 3-loss team in the AFC, so that's a big game for both teams, and I'll agree with you on that. I had that as my game of the week also.
All right, Dave. So, what is going to be your? Excuse me. Which game is your dud of the week?
Besides the Thursday night game, which I would say is the clear dud of the week, I'll go with the Falcons at the Panthers. Obviously, the Panthers, are playing for next year, but they don't have their own draft pick, so they're just kind of playing out a losing season, hoping to, maybe get Bryce Young a little more towards where he needs to be as a quarterback and just getting him as many reps as they can. Like I said, their defense is playing better. I think this is going to be a low-scoring game. The Falcons are just not that interesting to me ever. As a team to watch. So that's my dud of the week. How about for you?
For me, I'm going to go with the New York Giants versus the New Orleans Saints. The point total is less than 40, and both offenses are unpredictable. Yet both teams have above average defenses, so this will be a weird one.
Yeah, I think that's probably a good choice. Yeah, Derek Carr, man, getting booed at home and stuff.
Yeah,
and the Giants have a folk hero quarterback, so it's kind of interesting what's going on with those two teams. How about you're always good at this one, Paul? How about your sneaky shootout of the week? What do you got?
For me, I'm going with the Chicago Bears versus the Cleveland Browns, Dave. Another game with a point total less than 40, yet both teams have strong offenses and quarterbacks playing well, paired with defenses that can create turnovers but give up yards and points. This is an interesting matchup.
And I like that one. I'm going to go with the Broncos at the Lions. The Lions offense before last week, and the Bears really shut them down, had been putting up a lot of points. This game is indoors, so you get Jared Goff at home, the team on a fast track. And the Broncos have been, Russell Wilson's been playing pretty well. The Broncos can run the ball. The Lions defense has been pretty terrible over the last month. I will not be surprised if, there's around 50 total points scored in this game. And it's a little more high scoring than people think.
Agreed. Which team has the biggest chance of pulling off an upset this week, Dave?
So I'll give you two of teams that are underdogs by more than a touchdown. I'll go with the Jets getting 8.5 at Miami. There's supposed to be bad weather, which is the Jets' forte.
Yeah.
They won that Giants game in bad weather. They won that Texans game in bad weather. They're a bad weather team with that defense. It's supposed to be windy and rainy in Miami. So I think the Jets have a real shot, especially if Tyreek doesn't play and with that offensive line so banged up for Miami. And small upset, I'll go with the Panthers. They're 3.5-point underdogs to the Falcons. Their defense is playing well. Ritter turns it over a lot. I'm not predicting an upset there, but if the Panthers get their second win of the season, this is as good a place as any for them to get it on their remaining schedule. How about for you, Paul? What are your upsets, or what are your best chance of pulling off an upset?
I don't know if this would necessarily be an upset, Dave, but I like Denver's chances of winning their game versus the Lions.
That's an upset. I think they're getting 3.5 or something like that. So
yeah,
that's 100% an upset.
I also, if I can add this team in there, I don't know, just the way that they're playing, I wouldn't be surprised if New England, were to beat the Chiefs, man.
That would be a big one.
Yeah,
but
the way their defense is playing right now.
Yeah, they've only given up something like 44 points in their last 4 games. So they're I think the Chiefs will get their act together this week.
I'm sure they will.
And I think their defense will. I don't see New England scoring a lot of points in that one, but you never know.
Right.
That would be a pretty tough loss for the Chiefs.
It would.
So let's turn to fantasy football. This is not the ATB fantasy show, so we should talk a little bit of fantasy football to close out the show, like we always do. For most leagues, the fantasy playoffs are underway. They typically start week 15 and are a 3-week deal. So for a lot of people out there, it's do or die. It's, win or go home this week. And I want to talk about two of the top receivers in the NFL who are both coming off injuries. So Justin Jefferson, he was out with that hamstring injury for about 5 or 6 weeks. He comes back and immediately has a chest injury where he has to go to the hospital, but he says he's playing this week. Tyreek Hill, my guess is, he didn't practice today, which is no surprise. I'm guessing he won't practice tomorrow, and maybe they'll list him as a limited participant Friday, and he'll probably go into the game as a GTD, game time decision, with a questionable tag. My guess is, he wants that record. He knows the team needs to win. My guess is he'll tough it out. And if they're active and you have them on your fantasy roster, I mean, you have to start them, right? But how nervous would you be rolling either one of them out this week?
Yeah, I mean, not knowing who your quarterback's going to be for the Vikings, that makes you worried about Justin Jefferson, but I'd like to think that he's quarterback proof. However, man, he came back from injury and then he gets re-injured, or, he hurts himself again. I'd definitely be worried about that. But and then, of course, with Tyreek Hill, it's the playoffs, man. You never want to get cute, but you definitely start those guys, but you're not feeling great about it.
Yeah. I mean, the other thing is, Tyreek did score a touchdown in that first game against the Jets, but had one of his lower yardage totals of the year. The Jets have given up the fewest fantasy points to wide receivers on the season. And, we've seen them, and I said this last week and they did it again. Like, it doesn't matter what quarterback they play. They just shut down passing games. And Tyreek's always going to get his if he's healthy. They just find ways to get him the ball near the line of scrimmage, so he's always going to get a lot of catches. But especially if the weather's bad, if it's, if wind is affecting longer passes and if it's rainy, again, if he's active, he's the number one receiver in fantasy this year by a decent margin. Like, you have to play him.
Mm-hmm.
But it's not a great spot. And with your season on the line, you got to just, I wouldn't get cute either, because the risk is you don't play him and he catches 2 short screens that he takes 70 yards for touchdowns.
Yeah.
Or who knows what he's capable of. So I thought that was one of the more interesting fantasy, kind of things to think about this week, because those are obviously, 2 really big names. I'd feel much better about rolling out CeeDee Lamb at the Bills, which is not an easy matchup, but
Right.
or AJ Brown at the Seahawks. Like, those are just better, safer matchups with guys who aren't coming in injured.
Very true. Very true. So, Dave, we talked about the Patriots. I was saying that, maybe they could upset the Chiefs. And reason being is they've only allowed 44 points over their last 4 games. And the Chiefs' offense has sputtered versus what we're used to. And Pacheco missed last week. We don't know if he'll be back this week. Any concerns here with any Chiefs that you'd normally start?
Yeah, I would temper my expectations on Patrick Mahomes. As it is, he hasn't had a great season. He's like barely, I think he's like the QB 8 maybe on the season.
Yeah.
He's really suffered from not having enough reliable targets in the passing game. I sort of feel like this is going to be one of those games where no Chiefs pass catcher has a great game, but he completes passes to like 10 different guys, and everyone has like 3 for 30 or something like that. He's definitely relying on Rashee Rice more lately, and he's kind of emerged. You're starting Mahomes, you're starting Kelsey, you're starting Rashee Rice. If Pacheco plays, you're starting him, but I don't see them putting up a ton of points in this game, and I don't feel great about Mahomes this week. Again, you're unlikely to have someone else on your roster who's better if you use the draft capital that was necessary to get Mahomes.
Yeah.
But I don't feel great about their offense this week in this game. How about you?
Yeah, I actually, oddly enough, I feel a lot better about Pacheco being back just because of his running style and this matchup and everything, kind of keeping that offense going, sustaining drives. But I'm not feeling great about this matchup overall, Dave, and especially just the way the Chiefs' offense has looked. I'm sure that they will right the ship, you'd like to think, but it might not be this week.
Yeah. Another offense that or an offense that was really firing on all cylinders and has, largely because of injuries, just, kind of ground to a halt in the last couple of weeks is the Texans. First, they lose Tank Dell, who was, having a phenomenal rookie season. This past week, CJ Stroud got concussed and Nico Collins suffered a calf injury. He left the Jet game, and their offense did nothing in that game. If Stroud can get out of the concussion protocol, how confident are you in starting him at the Titans? You might be without, you're definitely without Tank Dell. You might also be without Nico Collins and Dalton Schultz, who's missed the last 2 games. Titans playing a little bit better. How you feeling about Stroud this week, if he can even play?
Not good at all, especially without Nico Collins and potentially Dalton Schultz to go along with Tank Dell. Nah, man, there's, of course, having a better option than CJ Stroud, you might not have it, but I don't know. This might be one of those weeks where if he's missing all 3 of those guys and he's recovering from a concussion, you might just be brave and say, I might start a high upside wide receiver or running back this week.
Oh, as in like a super flex, you mean, as your QB?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the good news is a lot of people who have Stroud, because he was, didn't come into the season as anything more than an unproven rookie.
Right.
A lot of people who have him, unless they made a trade because they got him and decided they could just go with him, might have a better quarterback on their roster. Like in my main league, the guy who has Stroud also has Justin Fields. And I'm sure, and I'm sure he'll play Fields this week, as I would if I was in that situation. So, but a lot of people started relying on Stroud. I mean, he was having 300-yard game after 300-yard game, but
Right.
yeah, this is one I think I would avoid if I could.
Absolutely. All right, Dave, here we're going to talk about our fantasy picks of the week. Which highly ranked player is your fade of the week in fantasy?
So I mentioned him earlier. Patrick Mahomes, he's the QB6 this week. I think he's always got a decent floor. I don't think the game's going to be a disaster for him, but I'll be surprised if he finishes the week as the QB6. I think he'll probably be more like the QB 10 or 11. You never want to doubt him too hard, and he took some crap this week for how he handled the end of that game. He's got maybe a little chip on his shoulder, a little something to prove. He's pissed off. So maybe this is a dumb call, but I just don't see him finishing as anything close to the QB6 this week. So he's mine. Who's yours?
Yeah, I'm going to go with Alvin Kamara. He's the RB2 this week, facing a Giants defense that's allowed only 1 total touchdown to running backs in the last 4 weeks. Mixed in with Dennis Allen's weird usage of Kamara, I don't like this matchup.
Okay, that's a good one. So flipping to the opposite end of the spectrum, which lower ranked player is your sleeper of the week in fantasy?
I'm going to go with Mr. Garrett Wilson. He's the wide receiver 20. We saw Zach Wilson's performance last week, and we've seen that Wilson can produce with questionable quarterback play. I like the matchup against the Miami defense that can't really get out of its own way and coming off a bad loss and dealing with some injuries right now.
I like that one. Do you know that Garrett Wilson has more targets this year than Tyreek Hill?
Wow.
Yeah, I saw that today. I don't know how many more, but they're, he with a real quarterback there, I don't know what kind of season he could have had. But he's been targeted. So mine is Geno Smith, and there's a big asterisk with this because he missed last week's game with a groin injury that he suffered in practice. Those are always the worst. Your guy gets through the week, doesn't get hurt on Sunday, gets hurt on Thursday because he bangs into one of his own players at practice and somehow hurts his groin. But assuming he can play this week, and he's ranked as the QB 21 right now coming into the week, and I think that reflects the fact that he might not play. But assuming he plays and he's got an extra day because they play on Monday night. The last time we saw him 2 weeks ago, he was the QB1 for the week in that game against the Cowboys, where he, I think, accounted for 4 touchdowns. He ran one in, he threw 3. had a ton of yards, played really well in that game, his best game of the season. And they're playing the Eagles, who, have allowed the second most fantasy points to quarterbacks and 29 passing touchdowns, which only the Commanders have allowed more. So if Geno plays this week, I think he's ranked way too low, and he would be my my sleeper of the week.
Yeah, gotta like that matchup too.
Yeah. So Paul, who's going to be the highest scoring player of the week?
Dak Prescott, currently the QB4 on the week. This will be a back and forth matchup between two high octane offenses, and either one of these quarterbacks could really be the highest scoring player at week's end. But give me Dak Prescott, who's the hot hand right now.
Yeah, I was tempted to go with one of the quarterbacks in that game, but I'm going to go with a little bit off the board here with Matthew Stafford. The last 2 weeks, Stafford playing two of the best defenses in the NFL, but also teams that put up points. So he needed to keep up. He's put up like almost 50 fantasy points over the last 2 weeks against those defenses. And now he's got the Commanders coming in. And in their last two games, the Commanders gave up 45 points to the Cowboys and followed that up by giving up 45 points to the Dolphins. And Prescott and Tua both had big games against them, obviously, with that many points scored. I just think, the Rams could put up a ton of points in this game. Washington can't cover, and after they traded Sweat and Young, they can't get after the quarterback either, and their secondary has just really been exposed without that pass rush. So I will go with Matt Stafford just because he's playing such an awful defense, and he's playing great right now. So if you've got Matt Stafford heading into the first round of the playoffs, I think you can feel pretty good about rolling him out there as your QB1 this week. Example, I would play him over Mahomes this week if that was my choice, based on the match.
Yeah, I hear that. Yeah, I would too.
Well,
All right,
Paul,
Dave, who will be?
You go.
Who will be the highest non-scoring quarterback of the week?
Or the highest scoring non-QB? I'm going to go with Christian McCaffrey. And I know it's a really chalky answer, but the last 2 weeks has been like the Debo show. They're at Arizona this week. Arizona has allowed the most receptions by running backs on the season. And I could just see this being a McCaffrey game. He didn't score last week. It was interesting that the 49ers got the ball at the beginning of the game. The first play from scrimmage is a 72-yard run by McCaffrey, and he gets knocked out at the 3. So he's just run 72 yards. So Jordan Mason comes in and gets the touchdown, which was obviously all McCaffrey because he got him down there. I just think this is going to be one of those like 3 games where he gets 3 touchdowns and puts up a ton of points. The reason that might not happen is they could get up by a lot. But I don't know. I think the Cardinals maybe hang around for a little while in this one. So my choice is McCaffrey. How about for you?
Yeah, Dave, like you said last week, from time to time we're on the same wavelength. We ask so many questions. It's a long show sheet, but Christian McCaffrey is also my answer, and reason being is Debo has gone off in back-to-back weeks. It's McCaffrey's turn now, so
yeah,
I like Christian McCaffrey as well.
Okay, all right, Paul. The last piece of the show here, the bold call. What is your bold call for Week 15?
My bold call, Week 15 edition. The Chiefs lose to Bill Belichick and the New England Patriots, and Patrick Mahomes has his first ever 3-game losing streak.
All right. This one pains me as a Dolphins fan, and maybe I'm trying the reverse jinx here so that it won't happen. My bold call of the week is that the Jets upset the Dolphins in bad weather. Zach Wilson plays well for the second straight week. Miami's offensive line injuries are too much for them to overcome against an aggressive defense, and it's full panic mode in Miami after losing 2 home games that they should have against teams that on paper they should have beaten. That's my bold call. It better not come true.
Let's hope not, Dave. The league's just funner when Tua and Tyreek and Waddle are playing well. It really is.
I agree.
Well, Dave, man, I enjoyed it.
Man.
Yeah, really, they really are. Dave, as always, I enjoyed the discussion tonight. Before we get you out of here, remind the people they can find you on X and what where they can find your content.
Absolutely, and it was a fun discussion tonight, Paul. And there'll be a lot to talk about next week, also, with no buys, all the teams playing, and the playoff race just getting tighter and tighter. I'm at Pigskin Papers on X/Twitter, and my website is thepigskinpapers.com, and you can get all my fantasy content there. Paul, where can people find you and remind them about your Cowboys podcast?
Yes, guys, you can find me on Twitter at Paul_Ryan15. And this week we will be doing a Buffalo Bills preview. Me, CD Piglet, aka Mike Crum, and Brendan Smith, aka Brendan_Smith. We'll be doing a preview and prediction show for the Buffalo Bills Week 15 matchup versus the Dallas Cowboys. So that'll be a lot of fun. And you can find that. I think we might be doing Saturday this week because I've got a work function on Friday night. Otherwise, maybe the guys might roll without me. So I've yet to discuss that with them, but we will keep you guys updated.
Excellent. And then we got Cowboys Dolphins in Week 16. Head to head, man.
And we have a very special guest that night, Dave. At least I hope so.
All right. I'll wait to see who that might be. All right, Paul. It's been a fun show. Good luck to your Cowboys this week, and have a great weekend. And
yes,
thanks,
sir. Go
everyone, for tuning in.
Yeah, have a good night, guys.